That's like.
Hello, everybody. Can I have everyone's attention, please? Knock, 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 knock. Hello. Come on around and kind of, let's make a little semicircle around here, if you're okay with that. First, a few little announcements. If you're an artist and you didn't get your name tag, get your name tag. Don't worry, I'll get mine after this. If you pre-ordered and paid for your catalog, they're right here with your receipt in them. Pick them up. If you'd like to purchase a catalog, they are $40. Exact change if you're going to pay by cash or credit card. Hopefully, no, I'm not going to wear it. You have to wear it. So that is that. My name is Angie Jennings, and I am the president of Kansas City Society for Contemporary Photography. And I so appreciate you all coming out to this wonderful exhibition that April Watson has put together. For volunteers, I want to thank Leah Murphy, even though she injured her thumb a few times. Shirley Harriman, Jolyn Martinez, Nick Reisig. Did I get everybody? Lisa Healy. I really appreciate all of your help in installing this massive show. Whenever we start this, I look at all the work and I'm like, how are we going to hang this? And it always comes out. It always comes out great. A little bit about our juror. April Watson is the senior curator of photography at the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, our beloved museum. And I've got to read all of this because I have not memorized it. During her 14-year tenure at the Nelson, she has curated numerous exhibitions from the museum's renowned Hallmark collection and organized several major loan exhibitions. Her recent projects, which you may have seen, I hope that you have, is Signs, photographs by Jim Dow, Art of Illusion, photography and perceptual play, Gordon Parks' Muhammad Ali, The Image of a Champion, excellent show. All of these are excellent shows. LA Landscapes, photographs by Anthony Hernandez, and Eugene Richards, The Run-On of Time. It's a retrospective co-organized with the George Eastman Museum. She is currently working on an exhibition of work by Evelyn Hofer, co-organized with the High Museum of Art. Watson has also contributed essays to artist monographs featuring the work of Jocelyn Lee, Bjorn Sterry, and Joni Sternbach, among many others. And we get to have her today. So please welcome April Watson.
Andrew, for that great introduction, and thank you for the invitation to be this year's juror of Current Works. I've been here now long enough. I realize it's actually been 15 years. I was looking, I'm taking my vacation. I said, okay, it's been 15 years since I've been at Nelson, and it feels a bit odd to be a senior curator there. It feels like there's so much still that I have to learn as a curator, but that's also part of the excitement. I think probably as photographers too, there's always something new to be working on, always something new to see and picture. I've been here now, we've been in Kansas City about 20 years, and I remember the old Society for Contemporary Photography, which was, I'm forgetting the exact year when that closed. It was
2007.
2007, okay, so it was right about when I was starting at the Nelson Atkins, actually. And I remember that feeling of this kind of there was a kind of a mourning for a lot of folks in the community, because that was a real gathering place for having exhibitions. They did a big high school show, I think, and just a place for photographers to get together and talk and share and get excited about their work. And the museum has, can function in that capacity to a certain degree, but we're a much bigger machine, and there's a lot more forms to fill out to kind of do that. So it was really, I think, so exciting when the SCP rebooted, and Angie and the board, you all do an amazing job of keeping the community together and engaged and scrapping things together and finding exhibition spaces. So kudos to everybody here, because I think that having that community in Kansas City helps us all. And really, when people ask me, well, who's your core audience? And I said, well, we have a great group of photographers here in Kansas City, and I'm very pleased to kind of step out of the museum and have a chance to immerse myself just looking at works that are really exclusively contemporary. Of course, when I work in a museum, I have a fantastic collection to work with, everything from daguerreotypes on up to contemporary. But it's a very different curatorial process, and as you can imagine. You have to, there's research involved, you're thinking of thematic shows, you have to plan well in advance, you're working with a great team of educators and designers and all of that. You have a budget you have to stick to. So this has been actually liberating, because I just sort of looked at the works online, and Angie said, well, this is about how much fits in the space, and I had the same reaction when we came in to sort of look at how we're going to hang it. That's too many works. But granted, I probably at the museum would have a little bit more wall space between some of them, but I think you always want to err on the side of inclusion, and there were some really terrific works here as well. So the curatorial process for an online juried show is different, and of course the biggest thing that I still have trouble getting used to is judging works through digital images, because you really, I'm still of the old school. You like to see the print, see how it is. But this has become, I would say, I've done enough of these online where there's, I think, a sense where you can at least sort of glean the quality of focus and detail and color and tone. You never quite know what you're going to get when you show up in person. I was really, really pleased that when we came, all of the prints looked just stellar, which is, of course, a testament to the great talents that we have here in this room and the folks that are represented on the wall. Within that process, it really is, you're looking at a screen, and in a way, there's an intuitive kind of aspect to the whole thing. I think if you're thinking about photography today, I think it's really difficult to define it by any one technique, any one philosophy, any one manner of working. And I think to do that, although you certainly could come in here and say, well, I'm only going to do a show of, say, documentary style work, or I'm only doing alternative process. And that is a very distinct curatorial vision. But I felt that for something like this, it really was important to not worry so much about that, about exactly what technique people were using, but to think about, how the process and the concept and the idea all were working together. And also just, works that, as you're flipping through the many submissions, kind of weren't cliched or struck me as being somewhat different, somewhat unique. And you make your first pass, and then you go second pass, third pass, and then you find out. The last few edits are, of course, the hardest, because you have to insert the knife the deepest. So it's great. Next year you'll have a bigger space. So your juror next year will hopefully be able to include some more works. As I went through, and I think when I saw the final selection, and this again is a kind of intuitive, subjective, I think, culmination of what I chose, and that is that it seemed to be a lot of the works, and I think especially on this wall, ended up being sort of contemplative or introspective in their subject matter. Maybe that was a reflection of my own state of mind, maybe kind of coming out of the pandemic, but I think there were a lot of really works where you're left kind of with the outer appearance of something, but the image somehow prompts you to kind of wonder or imagine sort of what the subject is thinking or doing. So there's just, I think, a feel of that runs throughout, not in all of the works, of course. And I think that's why that Fred Sommer quote that I include on the wall kind of struck me, is the idea that we look for that part of ourselves that is incomplete. And I think photography really offers us this opportunity to explore that part of us that maybe we can't articulate in words, or that interests us for some reason, but we don't exactly know why. I think sometimes photography can be as simple as kind of pointing at something and saying, look at that, that's interesting. I like that flower, I'm going to take a picture of that flower. And then you start, the more pictures you take, the more images that you print out, or however you choose to present them, the more you start to think about, well, what does that image look, what does that object look like photographed? Or, how am I going to be thinking about this in a way where no one else has thought of a picture of a flower that way, or something like this, where you're sort of thinking about, well, what is it, here's flowers, but I'm going to transform them. And these are very sort of, carnations, a very ordinary flower you find at a florist, but they become something much more mysterious, more magical, more mesmerizing, given the way that the artist has sort of submerged them. I don't know if it's in ice or water or whatever, but there's something a little bit different and interesting, and it becomes this wonderful kind of color study as well. I think I don't really have time to sort of talk through all of the works you see. You'll just see a range of things that I selected. I did want to include, and I ended up including, I think, quite a few what we might call alternative process pieces. Pieces where you wouldn't even call them a print necessarily. You would maybe call them works on fabric. I think it's always interesting, the idea of alternative process, because it speaks to the way we understand the history of photography as being non-alternative. If you really go back and you look at the history of photography, things like cyanotypes were being made right in the very first decades of the medium's history. So it's really not that radical. I think there's just moments within that history where there's a certain rhetoric about how you talk about photography that really kind of held sway for a long, long time. For a long time, you had to have taken Ansel Adams' zone system workshop to really prove that you knew how to make a black and white print to be taken seriously as an art photographer. Or if you were John Sharkowski at MoMA, the kind of work he championed was a documentary style aesthetic. It wasn't any kind of fabricated to be photographed or collage. And those kind of things held sway. Today, it's just anything is out there and anything is open for the taking, which is, I think, very liberating as for artists, but also I think a very daunting challenge, because now you really have to figure out what is your visual language, what is your subject matter, what do you want to say conceptually, and I think ultimately, people make pictures first and foremost for themselves, but then you also have to figure out, well, how does my picture fit into the world of ideas? How does my picture fit into what's been done before? What makes it different? What makes it unique? What takes it to another kind of level? The works on the wall over there, I think Shirley and Angie's works. It's sort of interesting too about, and this kind of gets the idea of sort of thinking about, I think, imagery that sort of bubbles up from our subconscious. That there's the wings that are so beautifully rendered in Shirley's photographs. Those, it's almost like there's any number of associations you can start to conjure with that. So it's how do you take that almost an archetypal symbol and create something that's interesting and unique and beautiful and mysterious. I think that's the other thing about a lot of these pictures is none of them you could nail down to have any singular meaning, and that's what makes them more exciting and more interesting. Or in Angie's photograph there, it's like this idea of exploring one's family history, family tree, roots, obviously a really powerful metaphor, but then how do you take that metaphor and create something that is very personal, very intimate, and very unique. You know, what is that you know, fantastic sort of process that she's choosing with that blue cast that changes every time you look at it. It's a very unique way of kind of presenting that idea, even though it's an idea we think about a lot, you know, family tree roots and that in histories and that sort of a thing. I don't really have time to kind of go through every picture here, and I'm happy to sort of answer questions you all may have. There's this, again, sort of this, as I was talking about, this wall ended up being sort of about portraiture, hands too. I guess I was looking sort of, as we put them all together, we sort of, you know, you start to create these little sort of mini themes within the larger theme. But something like this picture has struck me that, and it comes out all the more when you actually see the print. But you know, the idea of just a young child with hands over their eyes, but then just the wrinkles on the fingers suggests some activity that had happened, maybe a bath or swimming that went too long, and so it has these other layers to it that you start to imagine, and it becomes a more complex, more interesting sort of picture. Or you know, this very sort of gentle gesture of the feeling. I mean, you can, there's the emotion on the man's face with the hand, his own hand on his face. There's this idea of kind of self-care, self-love, maybe sadness too. I mean, there's a lot that you can sort of read into those kinds of pictures, which I think are really, really terrific. You know, some of these, I'll kind of wander over here a little bit. I really loved how some of these, what we might call the alternative processes pieces, incorporated the use of text and added imagery that relates to sort of a domestic sphere. There's also, I think, an element of, again, these are very personal pieces. We don't know the whole story. We don't know who the you is in this. But we get the sense that there's a relationship, there's a vulnerability, and it's echoed in the kind of the fragility of the actual material that the artist is using to create these works. And then these works here, Leah's works, beautiful. I mean, it also, if you're working as a photographer, it really helps if you have a fabulous model, right? It's not a given that the pictures are going to come out well, just because you have a very photogenic model, but there's just something, you know, again, about just the gesture of that hand that's just a little bit awkward, or these kind of long legs, she's kind of lying there. You feel a sense of the body in that space. You get a sense of her psychology, and and you know, that's an image where you do start to think about the history of photography and other photographers who photographed girls who are kind of on the cusp of adolescence, like Sally Mann did her whole series of At 12, Andrea Modica, a whole lot of other photographers. And it fits in with that tradition, but also has a very sort of personal aspect to it as well. And then this work is really interesting, and this piece actually kind of pops out, I think, too, if I recall. It's put back in here. But what I liked about this, and with some of these others, is that, you know, we're so used to photographs as a two-dimensional medium that you frame and you put on the wall. But, you know, these kinds of pieces are challenging that notion of presentation, or the idea that even any one picture can start to tell a story, that there's a photograph as itself layered with history and meaning. We read different kinds of photographs in different kinds of ways, so there's a very conscious choice to include this sort of technical information of presumably the kind of film that's being used. And then this photograph looks like some kind of maybe a family snapshot or whatever. So you start to think about family, landscape, history, and you're, you know, thinking about how the field of vision is interrupted there. And I love the fact that there's a sculptural quality to it as well, as you kind of think about this. Of course, the good old, you know, vantage point is also really important in the way that you think about a photograph. And this piece, which was a commission site in Walker, Missouri, or decommissioned, site Hotel 10, as the title is, a very kind of cryptic title if you don't know the actual subject matter. But in other words, it's a documentary photograph. But the way that it's being photographed is an aerial perspective. So it really becomes this wonderful abstraction of form and color and space. Also, thinking about the distance of the vantage point, not too high up so you can't see what it is, not too close to the ground, to allow just that perfect distance for creating the abstraction that is interesting and that you that forces your sort of cognitive senses to reorient themselves to try to figure out what's going on in the picture. I mean, as a rule of thumb, any picture that holds your attention for more than 5 seconds is a successful picture in this world, right? With all of the pictures, how many billions are uploaded every day? So all these photographs definitely do that. We kind of joke that this is our sort of corner of paranoia and suspicion or fear, which we didn't mean to have happen, but I am terrified of snakes. But there's something about this little guy that I just really responded to, and the intimacy of that. I would not physically want to be that close to the snake, but it's just a beautiful black and white photograph appreciating a natural creature. And then this is Judith's piece, Is COVID at My Door, which she sort of every day I think photographed, looking through the what's it called? Looking out and looking in. But it also suggests, I think, in a really interesting way, the way that she's inside looking out, and just that feeling I think that we all felt during COVID of being isolated, being a little bit afraid to leave, but wanting to peer outside and sort of see what's hovering just outside. And then this piece, sorry, my throat's a little dry, is a really interesting kind of almost paradoxical juxtaposition of these kind of pink quilted fabrics, which is sort of, if you think of quilts as sort of comforting, you think of women often doing the quilting work, and then these sort of images of soldiers with guns, which is a very sort of violent image. And so bringing those two things together, I think, is gives us pause and gives us an opportunity sort of to reconsider, how we read that sort of imagery in a different kind of a way. And in a way, it kind of numbs the violence of that imagery to have it sort of as part of this quilted fabric. On the other side, on the flip side, you have this violent imagery on a quilt that we think of as being very comforting and being very kind of an aspect of sort of something that's secure, keeps you warm, that kind of a thing. Over here, this is our kind of, I wouldn't want to call it new topographic-y, but it is a kind of this traditional documentary style work. This one actually does remind me of I think it's a Henry Wessel photograph from the New Topographic show, although this is Don McKenna's work in color. He does great work in color and sort of seeing this house, but also it's about the trees in front of the house. And so it's that sort of tension between the structure and the way it starts to dematerialize with this, within these little, all these saplings in front of it. A great picture. Reminds me actually of some of the Jim Dow photographs that we had. It was taken, I think, along with 66. John, is that right? But in color, and I think this is a great example of how color is such a potent carrier of cultural meaning, and it suggests a very particular time and a very particular place. And even though the abraded surfaces would sort of allude to the fact that this time has passed and that probably not a lot of people staying at this hotel anymore, the color even more immediately kind of brings that sensibility to the fore. And then also just really beautiful black and white photographs of these structures. There's something about just this desire for people to express themselves times 100, and there's something about all of these signs that there's this whoever made them or whoever owns this just wants people to know how he feels cover every inch of those windows. And that in itself is a perfect example of how the architecture speaks to the people who made it, who own it, who are selling things in it. And this is actually, there's not many expletives in this, so that's pretty good compared to what I've seen out there in the world. So, and I can kind of go around some of the others. I'm happy to answer any questions or thoughts that you might have. If I'd be curious to know if when you walked in you were surprised by the selection or not. I just sort of do this by myself and then you put it up and you don't quite know. But yes.
So I really appreciate what you said about kind of stepping out of the museum and having a whole different kind of a venue to work within. And undoubtedly, your collection is just beyond belief. But what's your sweet spot for photographs that you will just gravitate to every time? And it's just like this is like my cheeseburger of photographs here.
My cheeseburger. It's a hard question for me.
Yeah.
Because people say, oh, what's your favorite photograph in the collection? And I think as a historian, you're always also thinking about the social and historical context of kind of historical works. I think with contemporary works, it's works that, and I really couldn't say that it's any one subject. I do love documentary style work, I would say. I do love the kind of 1970s new topographics, Robert Adams, I love. But I also feel like I'm just really interested in anything that sort of speaks to the world we're living in a new and interesting way. And I think also, in speaking, when I meet with sort of contemporary photographers, sometimes they're not even just working in one way, that they're working with multiple types of photography to get at a particular subject. I met with a photographer the other day, for example, and she's sort of making a photographic project about the process of doing in vitro fertilization with her partner. It's a very intimate sort of subject. And some of them are beautifully crafted black and white photographs. Some of them are sort of Polaroids, and because she felt there was no one sort of way of sort of telling that story. And I see more and more artists working that way, which I think is really actually very interesting.
Like the right tool for
the right tool for the right thing, and maybe there is no one right tool for the right thing. So, I think that's. I guess as a historian, I'm also a sucker for contemporary work that somehow is in dialogue with the history of the medium in some way. So, it's kind of probably not too surprising.
Awesome.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I have just an observation and a question.
Yes.
This is the first time I've seen the exhibition in person, and the overall tenor to me feels very poetic. And my question, I don't know if other people perceive that, but that's my impression. But the question I have is, I know, like, for example, you were probably just in Paris for the photo.
For Perry photo,
And so are we the macrocosm and the microcosm? I mean, how does what we are doing relate to the bigger picture of the country, of the world?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good question, and I think that it's I mean, anytime you go to a big art fair, there's a market component to that that's
right.
Skews the whole thing a bit,
Okay.
And sometimes you go there and people are selling like these fashion photographs from the 90s that I have zero interest in, but they're trying to make money and sell to private collectors and that kind of thing. But I do think that there's much more variety, at least that I saw in this past year, of people working across different medium. So in the way that feels like what's here, I mean, I think there's a lot of interest still in identity, racial identity, gender identity is still something, and there's some of that here, not maybe as much as you sort of see at the art fairs. And I think I'm trying to think of what other. I mean, the other thing that you have at the fair is the books, and that's a huge. I don't know how many of you work with books or conceive of your work as kind of thinking about books. Yeah, it's very different. I mean, it's so important to our field, which makes our field so different from, say, painting or sculpture. Is the idea of the photograph in a book lets you do things with it and say things with it that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do in an exhibition. And that's something that's exciting to see in the fair. It's just the proliferation of artist books and the way that they're kind of reinventing that as well. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I thought your observation about this last photograph that you looked at and pointed out, there's not a lot of expletives there.
Right.
It was really interesting. Yeah, I see something like that. I mean, it's a wonderful photograph, but I'm just so revulsed by the ignorance that it imparts.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what really makes a lot of photographs really fascinating, because you're all of a sudden confronted by something. It's like, yikes,
Right.
And then this group looking out the peep hole.
Yeah.
I love that. I really do. I think that's just wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I don't really have a question. I just appreciated you sharing all this. I like the diversity of what I see here.
Yeah.
It's so diverse.
Yeah.
It's so completely diverse.
But I think you raise an interesting point. This came up in the Jim Dow show of when you're photographing something like this, how do you present it without necessarily making your own political commentary, and that's a very hard thing to do, I think, as a photographer. It's like, well, I want to show that this is the country we live in, but do I want to mock that person? Do I want to call attention to the ignorance? Is that my main point? Or do I just want to kind of show that this is where we're at in this country? And I think that's a really hard thing as a photographer. You really have to think about, not only how am I making this picture, but how am I presenting the work, and in what context am I kind of sharing this work? Yes?
If it were a part of a series where it was not taken out of context, but within a whole series of not necessarily there, but all kinds of society,
Yeah.
I think it would fit in very well.
Yeah, that's a great point, is that, different perspectives, and then you started to see just that, everybody just seems to want to express themselves, whether it's on social media or on signage or whatever. Like, there's this pent-up urge to voice one's opinion. And maybe the poetic response, maybe other than this picture, was like, I don't want to hear your opinions. You know what I mean? It's like, I want to just sort of, maybe there's a quietness, maybe, or contemplative. I noticed that when I pulled them together, that I just wanted to sort of not think too much or be anxious, and maybe that was just working in my subconscious when I made the selections for some of these. So yeah.
I have another question that I remember, but I have not been a part of this. But we sometimes get to a point in our careers that we have a body of work and would like for someone other than yourself or a close friend photographer, how do you go about having portfolio reviews? And no, Nelson doesn't do that. Is there a venue somewhere that is out there for us to?
Well, I don't know what kind of portfolio reviews we're doing one in January, so I will be doing one in January for whoever wants to sign up. There are paid portfolio reviews around the country, and I've done a couple of those. You do have to pay to be a part of them. I know some of you, I know Jeff, you've done several of these and can probably speak for your experience as a photographer. They differ, in terms of the quality of the reviewers, the kind of reviewers you want to be talking to. Some of them are younger people who are only thinking about kind of online perspectives. Others are museum curators. Sometimes you have European and a bigger, like Photo Fest in Houston is a huge affair. It's expensive is the other thing. But you do sign up for you get a certain number of reviews for a certain number of dollars, and there are European curators that come in, and that I think actually can be valuable too. Deanna Dykeman, who was your last juror, she had her book at Perry Photo, and she said, I keep getting these shows in Europe, And I don't know why. Like, why do the Europeans like this work more than the Americans? And I think, well, I think it's just, first of all, in Europe they have national funding for the arts, which we don't have so much in the United States. So in festivals, but there is a different sensibility, I would say, and so portfolio reviews of that kind give your work out to a wider audience. But I don't know if anybody who's done them wants to talk about the value or the pros and the cons of doing those kinds of portfolio reviews. It does get your work in front of people, I will say, and that there's a value to that in and of itself. But yeah.
I could if you want me to.
Yeah, well, which ones? You've done PhotoFest and
PhotoFest,
yeah.
And I didn't do any others after that because that was, what, 3 days,
It's a grueling.
$2,500,
Yeah.
all told, flying down there and all that stuff. I met a lot of photographers that were in the same boat. I met a lot of reviewers that were interesting in people,
Right.
but didn't seem to be that interested in except what they were after. Gallery owners wanted this pretty specific stuff. Museum curators were pretty open and understood or liked a wide variety of things, but still, it's not like we're gonna buy your stuff. The best part of the whole deal, of course, was meeting other photographers and making new friends that you keep with. And some of the photographers that I met said you have to go to a few of these before they start taking you seriously. I don't have that kind of money. But there's one in Portland, there's one in New Orleans, there's in New York.
Yeah. There's a lot. Chicago has one. Now Portland does do an online review called Critical Mass, which is just online, and then they have an in-person portfolio review. But the Critical Mass, and I've done that, and it's hundreds and hundreds, and it's overwhelming. But that is another way to get your work out there, and it's really it's a smaller fee, and you submit your work digitally, and they have a large roster of people, and it just gets it out there. I think I also, curators differ. Some curators say, I only will look at your work at a portfolio review. I'm happy to look at works on appointment, if I have the time. We're doing the portfolio review here, so that'll be a great opportunity. And I think a lot of I think it's a lot of just not being afraid to sort of go to a review and say, I just want your feedback. I think often I'll start a portfolio review and ask them what they want from the review, because if they want me to acquire their work on the spot, that is probably not going to happen. But we can start a dialogue and keep in touch, and I can see how the work evolves and grows, and as we're thinking of projects down the road, oh yeah, I saw that person's work there, and and so that can also be valuable to kind of build those works. It's a slower process in some, at least for museum curators, but that's one place to start anyway. Yeah. Yes.
Can I hop a little bit off topic and ask? I saw today that the Nelson acquired a Julie Blackman.
Yes.
And so my curiosity is, I'm sure you didn't make that decision yourself. That's a group effort. That's a question for you.
Uh-huh.
And how do you, in a body of work that size, narrow that down to the image? I think it's just one, but I could be wrong.
Yes.
To what you collected, what you chose.
Well, that's a great question. Usually, I as the photography curator will see work out there and, there's a whole hierarchy. Say, I saw this work, I think it's really exciting, can we consider it? And, I talked to William, who's my boss, and the director, I think also weighs into a certain extent. with the Julie Blackman, it was actually something that Julian had said, oh, maybe you should go investigate the show. We know Julie's work. We have a lot of her earlier work in the collection, but the works we had really only dated between up till about 2005, 2006. We didn't have anything that was recent. And, you know, that was also, I think, the gallery, you know, you have the show. Sometimes they reach out and say, hey, we have this new work, come check it out. And so for that particular instance, you know, we were looking at, there were 2 works that she did that were based on Bingham paintings. And I just sort of gravitated to the paddleboard one and said, well, this, if we are going to do, you know, make an acquisition, this would be the work that I think would be interesting. And, you know, I think when it makes sense, also we think about our place in the community and supporting local galleries. When that's possible and when there's work there that makes sense for our collection to be adding. So that's how that particular one came about. If that kind of answers the question. Yeah.
Congratulations, that'll be fun to see.
Yeah, thank you. It'll be going up next summer, so you'll see it. Yeah.
Can we hang it next to the big one?
It doesn't quite relate to that one, but then we also got a gift of Gregory Krudson that we're going to go. So it's going to be new acquisitions that happen on View next summer. Yeah. So so come on in.
Okay.
Great.
Any other questions? No? All right. Let's give her a big hand and